Around the world, nearly every country has got their lands defined with lines. Lines which may or may not curve with natural borders such as rivers or mountains, unless you're a Saharan or Middle Eastern country. But just because a country has their borders already defined, doesn't necessarily mean they are happy with them. If they aren't, then they'll actively dispute the border between them and whoever they want to take land from, be it slightly moving the border to the right or claiming an entire region of the country as theirs. Creating enough of an uproar about it can end up giving it the disputed border treatment on Google Maps. One of which is Guyana. The South American country that gets classed as part of the Caribbean has a border dispute on both ends of the country, where Suriname claims some of Guyana for themselves and Venezuela claims most for itself, leaving Guyana to look like a vertical Gambia. But how did we get here exactly? What's caused Guyana to have these two border disputes? Little spoiler, it's from colonialism, much like every other problem for countries outside of Europe. The start of the claiming begins in the 19th century, shortly after the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1814, where the Dutch had given up this part of Dutch Guiana to the British, which would soon be named British Guiana. The land to the east, which the Dutch Guiana owned, was relatively calm until the disputes came along, since the border between those two were somewhat distinguished. The land to the west, however, is where problems started first, because the boundaries on that side weren't greatly defined. According to old treaties between the Spanish and the Dutch, Venezuela, which was part of Gran Colombia at the time, believes that the lands to the west of the Essequibo River was rightfully theirs because of those treaties. The formal complaints of the territory began in 1822 against Britain about their settlers settling in that territory. But unfortunately for them, the British couldn't give a toss about any claims made, and even pushed for colonising the area. Moving forward a little, Venezuela's its own country now, breaking off from Gran Colombia, and Britain really wanted to stick it to them this time, and got someone in to draw up a boundary between the two. Venezuela wasn't happy at all with the drawn up boundaries, and claimed all of the land as theirs even harder, even when Britain tried to concede some of the claims' land to them. They both came to a semi-conclusion on the territory, and the disputes quietened down for the time being, until gold was found in the area, and then the claims fired back up. The discovery of that prospective booty continued the claims, and it had eventually spiraled into something known as the Venezuelan Crisis of 1895, which sounds really interesting in hindsight, but in reality all it did was get the US involved and something about the Monroe Doctrine. And to cut a 4-year-long arbitration short, Britain won, the border got drawn up, and Venezuela had to deal with it, and they respectively did. This would be a happy ending to the dispute if it ended here, but then that'd make this topic slightly less fun, and thankfully for that, the dispute came back nearly 60 years later, with Venezuela having enough prep time to come up with a flawless argument, and that argument was that arbitration was shoddy and everyone involved double-crossed Venezuela by doing dirty dealings behind their back. A good claim, I'll admit, but it'd be hard to continue it on, since it happened almost 70 years ago, and all the judges who took part in deciding the dispute are dead. Britain denied the claims, and now we're back to square one. There was one more attempt at trying to rectify the dispute once and for all before Guyana got independence. But talks got nowhere, and that just brings us to the now times, with the dispute still going on. I'm sure that's all I need to know for that claim. Now let's look to the other side of Guyana, with Suriname's claim to part of their land. Anglo-Dutch Treaty, guy comes along and draws up the border of British Guiana. That's the beginning of the dispute, nothing different unfortunately. But the main issue area of the border draw-up was in the southern part of the border, where the border followed the Kutari River. It was left as it was until 1871, when some Canadian explorer came along and said, "Wait a minute, this new river here actually flows through from here, not there." And with that sentence, a new dispute with British Guiana was created. There wasn't as much of open dispute about it like the western border had. This one even got settled during that whole arbitration situation with Venezuela, but the Dutch still tried to dispute it further, but it got thrown out since it was already done and dealt with. Negotiations opened up between the British and Dutch to settle on the situation on 2 occasions, one just before World War II kicked off, and the other before Guyana got independence. But of course, nothing came from these two, and that's just left the area disputed over ever since. Even some military skirmishes happened in the late 60s there, which the two settled with an empty agreement, whereby Guyana and the other Guyana both pinky promised to each other's faces to withdraw both of their forces from the entire region, with Trinidad and Tobago being a key witness for this promise. But the next bit of this is shocking. Guyana broke their side of the promise, kept their military stationed in Tigray, the dispute still goes on today, and Guyana heavily refuses to back down. I can't believe they would break a promise, that's why people have trust issues. I could use this bit of time quickly to say that Suriname also has another border dispute on the other side with France, but it's literally the same thing that they have going on with Guyana, but with the French. So those are the explanations for the border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, and Suriname and Guyana. And with that, that's a wrap for this one. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.